Good Thursday afternoon, and thank you for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Rena Sargentopoulos. New today, a 65-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the deadly shooting of a woman Wednesday night in Minneapolis. It happened near 26th and Broadway on the north side. That's just down the street from North Memorial Hospital. Investigators say the woman was with the man inside an apartment when the shots were fired. A gun and a knife were both recovered from the scene. Police say they're still trying to determine what led up to that shooting. Developing right now, travelers are anxiously watching their flight status. The FAA is cutting back on air traffic as the government shutdown enters day 37. Cancellations will start tomorrow morning and will affect 40 airports across the country, including MSP. So if you're traveling soon, you definitely want to check your flight status. The FAA says it is a 10% reduction in flights, which is an unprecedented move. Since day one of the shutdown, TSA officers and air traffic controllers have been working unpaid. So while some don't show up for work, the others who are feeling the fatigue. The FAA says it needs to keep the airspace safe.
I think it's going to lead to more cancellations. We're going to work with the airlines to do this in a systematic way. And again, we had a conversation about that. I'm concerned about disrupting people's travel. We had to have a gut check of what is our job. Is it to make sure there's, minimal delays or minimal cancellations, or is our job to make sure we make the hard decisions to continue to keep the airspace safe? That is our job, is safety.
Travel leaders also say this will not be a quick fix. The president of the Air Traffic Controllers Union says even if the shutdown ends soon, airports are still short air traffic controllers nationwide.
We only have 10,800 certified controllers. We're 3,800 short of what we actually need of 14,633. Controllers are resigning every day now because of the prolonged nature of the shutdown. We hadn't seen that before. And we're also 400 controllers shorter than we were in the 2019 shutdown. The issues are getting worse by every day, and we're taking steps steps are being taken to reduce that capacity of the airspace, mitigate risk where we can, and put the controllers in a position to succeed.
New today, the Minnesota legislature is losing a veteran. Senator Sandy Pappas, a Democrat representing St. Paul, announced she is retiring at the end of the 2026 session. Pappas has been in the legislature for 42 years, first being elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives in 1984, serving there until she was elected to the state Senate in 1990. She served as the Senate president from 2013 to 2016. Jacob Frey is heading into his third and final term as Minneapolis mayor, and he will do so with 4 new council members on the city council. Pearl Warren, Soren Stevenson, and Jamison Whiting won open races, while Elizabeth Schaefer unseated the incumbent Katie Cashman, that one in Ward 7. 3 of the 4 new members are endorsed by All of Minneapolis, a political committee that also supports Mayor Frey. Progressive council members will hold on to a narrow majority, which political science professor David Schultz says often clashes with Frey on key issues like policing and housing.
It's going to set up the dynamic for potentially more compromise and more negotiation than we saw before, or alternatively, more outright conflict. We just don't know which it's going to be yet.
9 of the 10 incumbents who ran are holding on to their seats, meaning most of the council will look familiar when the new term begins in January. Voters also agreed to dig into their pocketbooks and fund a majority of school referendums across the state. 62% of them passed on election night. Jennifer Hoff is digging in deeper into what this means for those districts.
Crosby, Minnesota, known for mining north of the cities, is now seeing a mountain biking boom, a success amongst the struggles weighing on school superintendent Rick Ollie.
We had significant hills to climb. We had to gain the trust of the public.
The district was facing $1 million deficit, and asking voters to approve a levy was Ollie's last shot after one failed the last 2 years, forcing more cuts then.
We're at our wits' end, and our school board struggled with conversations about how to make these reductions if it didn't pass.
Including at least 6 more teachers, every organized sport, and custodians. Except last night, voters showed up, 1,600 more than before, passing the levy in what Ollie calls a landslide.
I woke up, I took my first deep breath since probably the beginning of August. but we did it.
New data shows 62% of levies passed across the state, most of which were operating ones, funding day-to-day expenses like salaries and transportation, despite a tough showing last year and even tougher economic times ahead. Experts say this trend was better than expected.
You know, I think Minnesotans also understand the value of public education and how important strong schools are to their communities and also to their own property values.
Ollie says the levy here will raise an average homeowner's property taxes some $300 a year. Grateful for the support amid such hardship.
Everything we're doing, we want the community to know we are going to be good stewards of their tax dollars.
Levies paired with state funding is historically how Minnesota pays for public schools, although how much the state contributes is always a gamble, and that funding stream has been quite stagnant, at least recently. Other hardships include unfunded mandates and falling enrollment. Well, even though this was an off-election year, voters here and across the country made some serious noise, turning out and in some cases turning to new leaders. In Minneapolis, voters set a new record for turnout in a mayoral election, and in St. Paul, where there was just one race on the ballot, they had higher turnout than they had in 30 years. So what messages were voters trying to send? Here's Kent Erdahl.
As voters went to the polls, often in record numbers Tuesday, one theme emerged.
People are concerned about pocketbook issues.
Political analyst Brian McClung says according to exit polls nationwide, voters said Democrats did a better job listening to those concerns, at least this year.
The Republicans, I think, kind of lost sight of the fact that inflation and the economy really brought them into office in last year's elections.
It's the economy, stupid?
It's almost always the economy, stupid. And that is, the party that can best harness that and that can convince voters that they're on their side when it comes to better jobs, better pay, reining in inflation, dealing with rising costs. That's the party that wins.
If you read the pollsters, the shutdown was a big factor, negative for the Republicans.
Though President Trump acknowledged the impact of the shutdown today, NBC News polling in the days before the election showed deeper concerns about the economy.
2/3 say he is falling short.
A year after it carried him to victory.
Folks had an expectation that, inflation would come down quickly, costs would come down quickly, and that hasn't happened. And so you're seeing voters frustrated, rightly so.
But political analyst Abu Omara says those frustrations didn't just hit Republicans, pointing to Kali Herr's win over Melvin Carter as one big example.
The city of St. Paul election sent shockwaves across, the Democratic Party in Minnesota.
And on a day when both moderate Democrats and Democratic Socialists won big elections, there's another local race to learn from.
The Minneapolis City Council and the mayor's race is for sure a microcosm of that internal fight, debate that Democrats are having here and nationally. Do we stick with a more traditionalist, centrist, moderate version of the Democratic Party, or do we go all in on democratic socialism, kind of the Bernie Sanders style, go all the way to the left, appeal to young voters and try to build it up from there? And the outcome in Minneapolis was largely status quo.
The through point with all those candidates was speak to what matters in your community, in your state, in your city. So often we try to kind of paint a brush of the Democratic Party as a monolith. You should believe all things all the same way, all the same time. And politics is all about what your community needs. And so I think, if anything, the Democratic Party should take away from this is, be a big tent.
This afternoon, Minneapolis teachers will be back on the picket line as they push for a new contract. The Minneapolis Federation of Educators has been at the bargaining table hoping to avoid a strike with the district. The union says it is committed to reaching an agreement as soon as possible. It is asking for higher pay, class size limits, and more special education staffing. If they do not reach a deal, they will strike on November 11th. Right now, federal investigators are trying to figure out what caused that deadly UPS plane crash in Louisville earlier this week. Crews on scene have already found the black boxes and other evidence. Tom Costello is in Louisville with the latest.
Yeah, good day. The NTSB lab in Washington now has the black boxes from this fatal UPS crash on Tuesday. The flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. And the data engineers there at the NTSB lab will now go through and make sure that they can pull the data out of those black boxes despite the fiery wreckage from which it was pulled. Separately, a great focus today on how and why that engine and the pylon that holds that engine underneath the left wing apparently came loose, dooming this plane, and then, of course, the 3 people on board and at least 9 people on the ground. The death toll stands at 12, including at least 1 child, we are told. The investigation focusing also on the maintenance history of this MD-11. It was a 34-year-old plane for the last 20 years or so, serving as a cargo plane, and it was going to make this flight from Louisville, from the UPS World Operations here, all the way to Honolulu on about 38,000 gallons of fuel. It's that fuel that immediately erupted when the plane crashed, creating this massive fireball and, of course, scorching the earth, a half-mile debris field. The NTSB is still out on the field collecting all of that debris and the evidence. We're told that they are being assisted by the FBI. That's a normal part of the investigation. It does not suggest anything criminal, but this investigation is now just getting started. It will take months and almost up to a year before the NTSB comes up with a final determination of what caused this horrific crash here in Louisville. Back to you.
Stick with us. More news and weather coming up after the break.